Last session of the day, we're going to have a roundtable discussion. We have 4 speakers here. Each is going to speak under the heading 5-point plan for Ireland.
When anybody's invited to talk, to say, you know, a 5-point plan for Ireland, it's kind of irresistible. It's just like being given a soapbox in the middle of O'Connell Street at a conference like this. And of course you make out all the notes beforehand, and then you come in here for the day and you listen to it all and you think, oh my God, what can I possibly say that hasn't been said already today? What criticism can I possibly make, or suggestion that I can possibly make? Because it's been such an amazingly enriching day. So what I'm going to share with you are really just 5 points that I think could make a real difference in Ireland if we really tackle them. I was thinking about this for the last couple of weeks and thinking, what are the things that would really make life very different if we took it really seriously? So take this in the context of all you've heard today and put it into that mix in your heads, because what I'm going to say now is probably not what's written down here. It's very much coloured by what I heard today. The first of these points, I think, it has come out very neatly for me out of this morning's and today's discussion, and that is the need to use data to drive policy, to provide evidence, to make policy and public service more effective. That's pretty clear. A lot of people have said it, but we don't do it. We have a very poor record when it comes to systematic use of evidence to underpin policy. We tend to base decisions, and these are politicians and to a very significant extent civil servants, based on prior experience, intuition, anecdotal evidence, the dreaded sample of one, or the person in my constituency that I met last week. You would not believe the number of decisions that are made on those kinds of spurious bases. And we have been very late coming to this decision-making culture that we're talking about now, that recognises the value and centrality of data, and that seeks to amass all the available evidence before we actually make a decision. Comparators here, of course, would be the Scandinavian countries, the Nordic countries, and the UK, which has always had a very strong tradition of evidence-informed policy. And of course, this came across very clearly, our inability to do this during the Celtic Tiger era, because we had no idea of how to manage the boom. We've already heard today about how ineffectively we have made decisions around public-private partnerships. But the same can be said for investment in road infrastructure. The same can be said about our ability to help to measure, to understand change, to enable assessment of policy impact, to predict policy interventions, the impact of policy interventions, or to analyse policy post factum. We don't do this often, or are unable to do it because A, we perhaps don't have the data, and B, we don't have the skills. And I suppose the best and most dramatic examples of this during the Celtic Tiger era was our inability to apply rational decision-making to physical planning. There was no coherence in relation to land use, transport, planning, etc. And you know, the ghost estates, the housing crisis, and the faulty housing developments, etc. are all evidence of this. So in the National Statistics Board, a big part of our mission is to try to make data available for policy. Because getting the data together and providing the data to policymakers and providing to enable them to do the analysis is really one of the key solutions to our current problem. Because this will enable us to join up government administration, to eliminate the kind of policy and operational silos that have been talked about today, and it'll make policy and practice more effective across departments. Not to mention eliminating waste and duplication and so on. And of course, there's also been reference made today to the quality of the data we generate and the way we use that data, and in particular the way we use it to analyse problems and to compile indicators of progress. So the shortcomings of GDP, for instance, as a measure of development or growth, the need to look at quality of life, to measure well-being, to measure environmental impact and sustainability, all of that is crucially determined by the quality of the data available to us. And the key for getting the data right is to use much more, as well as survey data, to use make much wider use of administrative data. This is data which is collected by government departments to enable the delivery of government programmes and is held within departments and agencies. And the NSB is really stressing the need for a whole system approach to this data, to always obviously with regard to data protection principles here, and the CSO and its activities is very much guided here by the Statistics Act, which governs how they do their business and is particularly strong on issues of confidentiality when using data for statistical purposes. The point I'm trying to make here very simply is that if we are able to join the dots in relation to data, we will have much better analysis, and if we have much better analysis, we'll have much better policy. The other bit beside the data is the quality of the people to do the analysis. Reference today has been made to the Government Economic Service. That is not enough on its own. We need to beef that up with people who have skills around social analysis, around statistical analysis, but we also need to recognise that we have denuded many of our government departments of specialist skills, and they were scarce enough before we encouraged people to move out. And so we have a situation today where we have a fairly critical human resource issue in most of our government departments in terms of the capacity to make good policy, and even more so the capacity to oversee effective implementation. I talked a lot last year about implementation deficit in relation to regional policy, and we haven't seen really any improvement in that. If anything, we've seen a deterioration in the last year or so. And this is very much a problem of personnel. I think it's very unfair sometimes to be very critical of government departments who are trying to deal with much greater workloads, much greater complexity around policy, much greater European demands at the same time as they're losing a lot of staff. So there's an issue here about upping the capacity of the civil service. The second big issue is we need to revitalise our commitment to regional policy. We had balanced regional development as a national goal during the boom years. There was a real commitment to it. It was written down. It was in a plan. There was even a fairly serious attempt at implementation because there was a national spatial strategy. But of course, we fell down on implementation. Why did we fall down on implementation? Well, in some respects, the crash came and upset things, but more fundamentally, we failed on implementation because political considerations very often determined how decisions were made rather than rational spatial objectives that were spelt out in the strategy. So, if we are to have an Ireland which is not dominated by one great primate city like Dublin, if we are to have an Ireland where people can live reasonable lives outside of Dublin in the regions and find work in reasonable proximity to where they live, we need to revitalise our concentration on regional development and on what that means. And I could talk a lot more about that, but I think the key point here is to say we need to have a vision about this, and we need to have a plan about this, and we need to have an implementation strategy about this. It's not just good enough to say it's a good thing. And very closely related to the whole issue of regional development is the issue of local government reform. One thing you would have to say that has happened in the last 3 years, which is very welcome, is the long-promised reform of local government. It was there since effectively before the creation of the state. And this government, in fairness to it, grasped the nettle and has introduced a programme of reform. This programme of reform has been criticised, but it actually so far is working reasonably well. Elections have been held, committees are being put in place, structures are being developed. But the critical part is the next couple of years. And the critical part is to make sure that the support and commitment there to make local government work is given from the national state. Because it's not just enough to do it. It's not just enough to say it's a good thing. It's the ongoing support and resourcing of local authorities to allow them to do the things we think they ought to do and we've legislated for them to do. That's what's really critical. Because what happens very often is we don't resource people that we give responsibility to do things to, and this applies to state agencies, etc., etc. So, and then we blame them because they didn't do it. And this, believe me, will happen with the local authority and the reform of local government, unless there is a commitment from national government to make it work. Because these reforms are among the most radical in the whole history of the state in terms of their potential to radically alter the nature of policy delivery and its impact both on service delivery at local level and its impact on regional development. It's a really important development and we need to support it and we need to understand it. The third point, or the fourth point in relation to that, is the link between that and the work of the community and voluntary sector. There are a lot of people here in this audience, I know, who work in the community and voluntary sector. I myself do a lot of work and have a lot of contact with that sector. Its relationship with the state is quite a fraught one for all kinds of reasons, some of which have been adverted to today, which range from the way in which the whole local the development sector has evolved at local level, to the way in which voluntary and community organisations engage with the state at national level in the provision of services, at the nature of the contractual relationships, the regulations, etc., etc. What would make things really different for this country would be if the community and voluntary sector were recognised in a way that the adequacy of the reality of what they do and the adequacy of the communication with them was stepped up very significantly. I think that would make a huge difference. It's about respect. It's about communication, it's about measurement and recognition for what people do, and it's about asking the community and voluntary sector on their side to take responsibility for delivering high levels of service and high levels of governance. Two more things. One is broadband. If there is anything that would transform this country, and I was so glad to hear the previous speaker advert to it, it would be universal high-speed broadband now. We have been talking about this for 10, 12, 15 years now. There was an Information Society Commission that sat in the early part of the 2000s, and we thought we had it all figured out. We thought this was it was going to happen within 3 years. We thought again at every stage of every strategy that every department of communications instituted over the last 10 or 15 years. And still we don't have it, and still when I go down every week to Roscommon, I can barely get dial-up quality in my home when I'm out in the country, not to mention that the water coming out of the tap is undrinkable, etc., etc. But if there is anything that would transform Ireland, it would be universal broadband. Because at a high speed, as in next generation, because what broadband does and what IT technology does is to make distance irrelevant. It allows people to run businesses that trade locally from the very tip of Belmullet or the very southern part of Kerry. And there are companies doing that already and doing it against the odds. So it would have a huge transformative effect on our competitiveness, on our regional development, on our sophistication as a people. And so I think that would be hugely transformative. And the final plea is by way of, it's kind of almost a personal thing, because I stood at home yesterday and I heard on the radio that a woman down in Galway was 19 years a college lecturer at UCG, applied for promotion, was turned down in favour of a man who was less qualified, took her case to the Employment Appeals Tribunal, who said the university had treated her promotion in a ramshackle fashion. Ramshackle was the word they used. She should be re-employed straight away and given compensation. Is it believable that we have third-level institutions in this day and age that are treating gender equality issues in this way? As somebody who spent my entire 20s marching the streets for things like equal pay, equal treatment, maternity leave for women, etc., I look at Dáil Éireann, I look at the Web Summit, I look at this incident yesterday and I think, what are we doing as a country that we still are not treating men and women equally, leaving aside all the others? I spent a lot of my research life looking at gender issues and studying them. I am constantly amazed that we still have these problems. And that we actually do not accept yet that the recreation of the species, the perpetuation of the species, the growth of the population is about two parents raising a family, and that we need to adjust our work and our lifestyles and our spaces, public and private spaces, to facilitate that. And it isn't just about women doing it all by themselves and taking all the responsibility. Finally, I would say that what has hit me from today's discourse is that we really need to find ways to communicate more effectively between the state and the people. The Irish water debacle is obviously the most spectacular example of this lately, in that there is really a sense of disconnect between people's understanding of their role as citizens and the responsibilities that come with that, and what the state does and how you actually run the state. And it seems to me that that was really very significantly highlighted in the water issue. But it's around in a lot of other issues too. And this is why Social Justice Ireland is calling for deliberative democracy. It's why the whole local government project will stand or fail on the quality of the consultation with local people. It is why the future of our democracy, it seems to me, will stand or fail on the next few years, and whether the state is able to communicate effectively with the people, and whether the people understand that the money that the state collects is linked to the quality of the services that are provided to them. I think there's a lot of disconnect around that issue.